Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and this is brought to you by the World Puja Network. And I have a special guest with me today, Linda Willitts, who has been a CSETI, Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence member and a wonderful assistant and friend of my work for many years with me on the call today. And my name is Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm the founder and director of CSETI and the Disclosure Project. And we're going to talk today about the nature of consciousness and why the development of higher states of consciousness is so important to communication and contact with advanced civilizations from other star systems, and why that's important and how those technologies work. And it's going to be a very interesting discussion, and Linda Willitts will be here with me to discuss this because she has been present at so many of the important events where we've had important encounters with these visitors using consciousness and technologies related to them. So thank you very much, Linda, for being here.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to sort of start off by sort of introducing the topic, and I think what people get most confused about is when we say consciousness, we're not talking about what you're aware of, but the actual nature of the conscious mind. And in this sense, we're talking about the pure, unbounded component of awareness that everyone has experienced at some point. Is sort of the space between the thoughts, as it were, or the samadhi state, where you're just aware of awareness, just pure awake mind. And that state of awareness, which has had many names over the years in various traditions, is the nature that everyone has within their own conscious mind. And we have found with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence that it's really the Rosetta Stone of universal communication. And the reason for that, I think, is that any civilization that's going faster than the speed of light, their entire communication and energy systems, in fact, their entire spacecraft, crosses out of linear space-time into this non-local aspect of the cosmos, and their communication systems must use this nature of consciousness in order to be effective. That conscious mind, because of its nature, is omnipresent. It means that the mind itself is always everywhere. And it's sort of like what Erwin Schrödinger said, who was the father of particle wave theory that became quantum mechanics. He said the total number of minds in the universe is one, and that is, it's a singularity. And so as you sit listening to this interview, think about the fact that you're hearing the words, but the conscious mind that's hearing them is this one light of consciousness that's shining within all people, within all beings, but also within all things, and it's an omnipresent field of conscious intelligence. And that's what we're talking about, and the experience of it and then the utilization of it very specifically with technologies and techniques we've developed is very key, because we have found, and we've had this confirmed by military and top secret people who've worked in studying the extraterrestrial spacecraft that have been retrieved over the years, they have found that, in fact, their technologies interface directly from thought to the machine. So it's not even about touching some dials. It's about they think, and there's an actuation of that command in the spacecraft for guidance or for traveling through space. Very, very advanced technologies, and we're going to get into that and why it's so important that we understand this. And I want to tell a little anecdote about this. Back in the 90s when I was briefing President Clinton's first CIA director, R. James Woolsey, we had a dinner that was set up, well, at least that was the cover story for the meeting. And at this meeting, the CIA director, Dr. Woolsey, his wife, Dr. Woolsey of the National Academy of Sciences, came, and the conversation initially was about policy and secrecy and all the things we've dealt with at disclosureproject.org. But after a while we were having dinner together, the wife of the CIA director, Dr. Woolsey, said to me, well, how do they communicate through all this vastness of space? Because she was smart enough to realize that if you just take our Milky Way galaxy, which is the galaxy that our sun, our star system is in, it's 100,000 years across. That's the distance that a beam of light goes, traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles every second for 100,000 years. It's a big distance. But that's just one galaxy amongst billions of galaxies in the cosmos. And so the question becomes, how do you communicate or travel through those sort of distances? But she was specifically asking about communication. And I said, well, look, even if it was from a star system relatively nearby, say 1,000 light years away, which is only 1% of the distance across the Milky Way galaxy, our home galaxy, if you were using an AT&T cell phone or any other speed of light type of communication system, for you to say to your spacecraft that's visiting Earth, hello, how are you doing? And for them to say, oh, fine, how are you? That just took 2,000 years, 1,000 years each direction at the speed of light. And so it's obvious, anyone who analyzes this, that the speed of light is just too damn slow. And what that means is that when you really look at the evidence, and we have put together at disclosureproject.org this positive proof that we're being visited, that has been kept very secret. And part of the secrecy has to do that the disclosure of this information would upend a lot of paradigms, both scientific, orthodox religious, energy, all of it. And this part of it is, in a sense, one of the deepest held secrets, and that is that these advanced civilizations understand the non-local, omnipresent nature of consciousness, and that thought, coherently directed, can interface with a machine, a type of communication device, and communicate that information across vast distances of space instantaneously. And so I always joke, well, the Moody Blues weren't too far wrong when they said thinking is the best way to travel. But in this sense, it's literally affected by a machine, a technology that these extraterrestrial civilizations have. And we have found with our work with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which you can see what we're doing there at CSETI.org, that, in fact, this state of pure consciousness and the experience of it, and then using specific techniques to learn how to remote view and communicate, is key to being able to interact with these visitors, because it's their technologies are using that type of technology, that kind of communication all the time. So I think that's where people need to really think about that for a moment and realize that what many people might relegate to metaphysical or mystical considerations is actually a very important scientific and diplomatic consideration, since we are now being visited by these advanced civilizations, and they are obviously wanting us to communicate back. That it may not be done through radio telescopes and through walkie-talkies, but it may in fact be done through really more advanced concepts and technologies. So that's just sort of as an introduction, and I don't know, Linda, if you have some questions or things to add at this point.
Well, what I just comment on is we've seen that so many times in the field when we'll see a light in the sky that could possibly maybe be a satellite, and we'll think to it. We'll just think to it. If you're not a satellite, do something anomalous, and occasionally it will suddenly do a zigzag, or it'll turn around and go in the other direction, or something indicating that it was an ET craft and they were tuned into us.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and a lot of people who we take on these expeditions are kind of astonished. You can see when we do these at CSETI.org, or in fact we're doing one in Colorado in late June and early July, and another one at Mount Shasta over Labor Day for a week, and another one up in Joshua Tree National Park, and also Palm Springs in November. And we've had such astonishing encounters, some very close encounters, and there is a high degree of interactivity with thought. I remember one time in England, we were actually on Marconi Hill, which is in Wiltshire, where Marconi sent the first telegram, in fact, and it was part of the Royal Trust lands, but we were up there and had permission to use it. And we were doing this protocol for contact, and we had done a deep meditation, and the whole group had gone into this state of unbounded mind and then we had remote viewed deep space, and we had turned it around and vectored, as we call it, or guided these ET craft into the area. And about that time, we were then looking around at the sky, and it had cleared up, which is nice for England. And suddenly, there was a very bright object that came over. It looked like it could have been a very bright satellite. My intuitive remote viewing of it was that it wasn't. But there were some left-brain engineer-type guys there, and they said, oh, it's a satellite. And I said, well, let's ask it to do something a satellite absolutely can't do, because perhaps it isn't. So we sent that thought to it, and at that instant, I mean not 5 minutes later, but instantly, it stopped and made a right-hand turn and went shooting off into space. And everyone's mouths dropped open, and I said, see, this is what can happen. And it's exactly the sort of thing we've had happen literally hundreds of times over the last decade or two. And it illustrates how precisely thought can interface with these advanced extraterrestrial beings and their spacecraft, because their technologies all the time are scanning through that energy field that some have called astral or thought or conscious, as easily as you and I pick up a cell phone or a regular telephone and call each other. And I think that's one of the really big paradigm-busting concepts that kind of blows people's minds, particularly mainstream scientists. However, as a footnote to this conversation that I had with the CIA director and his wife, Sue Woolsey, who, as I mentioned, was Chief Operating Officer of the National Academy of Sciences at the time, after I told her that this was what was happening, and I was rather reluctant to, because I thought, well, she's going to think this is just too far out. But I really thought, well, if she was wise enough to ask the question, I'm going to tell her the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, even if it loses credibility in the eyes of sort of a conventional scientist. And after I explained all this that I've just gone through, she said, I thought it had to be something like that.
That's great.
Yeah, and so people are ready to hear the truth about this. And the truth is, our conscious minds really are omnipresent, and you can become very quiet and go into a deep meditative state and then awaken within that state, and in your inner sight see remote places, even out in outer space, and communicate with these ET craft and invite them in for a diplomatic meeting and encounter, which is what we do at CSETI. So I think that this is really a perfect topic for the World Puja Network, because I know many people who listen to this are very interested in the Vedic tradition and Vedanta and the oneness of consciousness. And this is a direct outgrowth of that, and it's really a very ancient knowledge, but it's also a universal knowledge. It's the universal communicator between civilizations, is this non-local nature of the conscious mind that's omnipresent, that all of us have folded within us.
And, another thing I've really noticed, and obviously you have too at our trainings, that when we do our night field work and we've been in this meditative state and communicating in consciousness with the ETs for several hours, and always when we're ready to leave the field, we stand in a circle and you say a few words of goodbye and good wishes to us before we all retire for the night, and the ETs are included in that. And many, many times the ETs will do some goodbye manifestation to us, like remember the twin white crafts that arced over us at Mount Shasta that time.
Oh yes, that was beautiful. In fact, we were in a circle at the end, and there was, I think, Venus in the east and Mars in the west, or vice versa, but they were perfectly east-west, male-female planets, and we were making this circle, and it was just a perfect night and crystal clear, and we were standing in the shadow of Mount Shasta there, and we did this, and there were 2 ET spacecraft came across the sky, lit up. You can actually hear them moving through the air. And they came right overhead, connecting one planet in the east to the other one in the west, side by side, as if to simulate a shooting star. But they covered the entire horizon to horizon in just a couple of seconds. It was astonishing, and virtually everyone saw it. It was breathtaking. And this kind of interactivity happens just almost all the time on these expeditions, and it really is proof of the fact that they totally understand and utilize and respect this nature of consciousness, and that's why it's such a key part of what we have to evolve into as a civilization, is this new paradigm of understanding the true nature of the conscious mind, and that it's a universal field of awareness.
What I love about it is that it isn't just about us going into consciousness and communicating with them, and they wait for that. These ending manifestations that they give us show that they're so in tune with us, and they initiate things. They
Right.
initiate communications with us as well as vice versa.
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the things that has astonished so many people who have been on these expeditions, and actually it's so exciting for me. I mean, it's what keeps me doing this year after year for the last 18 years, is that it's such a beautiful thing to see how we have had ET craft at times literally in the field with us, at other times flying over, but there is this strong connection to interactivity and with consciousness, and particularly when the whole group gets into resonance. It's sort of like Sheldrake's morphogenic field. When everyone reaches a certain resonance of consciousness, there is this often an amazing manifestation of an extraterrestrial vehicle, even an extraterrestrial being. We have had ET life forms that have appeared outside our circle, walking around, and then dematerialized and vanished. And for some people that might sound kind of unnerving, but for us it's just so wonderful. And it's the whole purpose. Our whole purpose for the CSETI is to create an understanding and then an action plan for interplanetary peace and interplanetary communication that's leading to a time of universal peace, because I think that's clearly the time that we're in. But in order to get to universal peace, we have to find this state of universal awareness within us, and that is the first step in being able to be an ambassador to the universe, which is what we call our training program. And I think that this is something that everyone can do. I think one of the big mistakes people have made is to think, oh, well, you've got to be, a guru in a cave for 40 years. And this simply isn't true. You can experience this aspect of awareness pretty easily, and everyone has this within them. I mean, if you're awake and conscious, you have the ability to just be aware of awareness and then begin to move and operate on that level of the universal, unbounded aspect of the mind, and remote view distant places, communicate remotely, and set the vector up. Now, we also use lasers and electromagnetic devices that project beeping tones into space so that it gives a very fixed linear space-time in case our minds are not clear. But, so we do use other modalities when we're out there, and they are very effective. And interestingly, we often will have interactivity through light or through the lasers and also through the electromagnetic devices, which we actually had happen recently.
And the ETs often, very, very often, signal back, to your laser, and like our, radar detectors. We have the cordless radar detectors in the field that they have spoken to us through.
Well, one of the things people, it's kind of an astonishing when it first happens, is you can be in the middle of a remote national park, like we were in November. I think it's a good time to sort of mention this. And we had an experience. We've had many experiences at this particular site up in Joshua Tree National Park. There's an area where we saw. Well, why don't you tell them, Linda, what happened in 1996, the first time you were there with our group?
That was incredible. We were at one location in the national park, and it was about 1:30 in the morning, and we were getting ready to leave. And you had said earlier that the ETs would do something spectacular and fast, and they hadn't done it yet, really. So we were driving out, and you were in the vehicle ahead of me. I was following you, and suddenly, the most astonishing thing, straight down from the zenith of the sky came this craft that was the size of my fist at arm's length, and it was
That's
like
big.
it was one of the biggest things I've ever seen, and it was almost fluorescent, kind of teal and sparkling white, and in the shape of a Hershey's Kiss, even with like the white paper at the top was kind of like white light, and it just came down straight, and as it approached the ground, it illuminated, as far as we could see, the whole ground. And this was, I don't remember, about half a mile away from us, I think. And it illuminated the ground in white, and I expected to hear a loud crashing sound or something. It just, when it shifted phases, went into the ground, and you spotted the exact spot, and we drove to it very quickly, and about 15 of us saw that.
Yes, and what's interesting is that area has been where we've had our contact site since then for the last 10 or 11, 12 years, and we'll be going back there actually in November. And we have had the most astonishing things happen at that place, and we know that, in fact, that this is where there's a very strong extraterrestrial presence. I think there's probably some facility underneath the earth in that area of the national park because it's protected. And I think that when we look at this whole question of how extraterrestrial civilizations might choose to communicate with us, we have to kind of get out of our anthropocentric, human-centered view of things that are locked into early 21st century technologies, because we're dealing with civilizations that are hundreds of thousands to perhaps millions of years more developed than we are. By virtue of the fact that they're traveling easily through interstellar distances, they're not going to be using, Exxon Jet A fuel. They're not going to be using fossil fuel energy systems. They're not going to be using electromagnetic communication systems that go at the speed of light, because it would be impossible to communicate through the distances of interstellar space. So you have to really begin to open the mind scientifically and analyze and question, how then might they communicate? How then might they interact? And it'll be in, as Dr. J. Allen Hynek said, who is initially an Air Force astronomer debunker of all this and later became a big advocate of it, he said it's just a lot of high strangeness, and yet it makes total sense when you begin to look at it from the point of view of the vastness of space and the fact that linear communication and linear travel is just too slow. You can't go interstellar at anything at the speed of light or lower, nor can you communicate. So when you begin to accept that as a fact and begin to then think, well, what then might be the various manifestations of a higher extraterrestrial civilization's technologies and how they might choose to interact and communicate, you really go beyond what I call the crossing point of light. You go beyond this light barrier, like we went beyond the sound barrier back in whenever it was, the 40s, 50s. I can't remember when we broke the sound barrier with a jet. But now we're talking about going past the light barrier. And the crossing point of light is when you begin to realize that most of what exists in the cosmos is resonating at frequencies beyond the speed of light, and that includes what some call the whole astral field energies and etheric, but also thought, consciousness, and all of that. And that any civilization that can go from some star system to here has had to figure that out, and has also had to make it a science and make it a something that actually can be routinely used. And that's what we're dealing with. And so that's why, so for some people, they think I've taken a kind of a left turn into consciousness studies and higher states of consciousness with the work that we're doing with our diplomatic effort with these advanced civilizations. I point out that it's actually the foundation of our contact work and of the foundation of universal peace and of communication and diplomacy is to understand this. And if you can't understand it, then if you're going to be very, very limited in understanding all the ways that these advanced interstellar civilizations might interact with us or may choose to, because they don't necessarily have to be using early 21st century Earth technologies. Why would they? Any more than we're using smoke signals to communicate from Los Angeles to New York. I mean, we're not using smoke signals anymore. So I think that we have to be open-minded about this. And I think that this thing opens this whole question then, how do we develop that ability? And we're going to talk about that in the next half hour or so, is that, how do we get from understanding this sort of as a grasp or an intellectual understanding to then being able to practice it? And this is a really big part of what we'd like to share with the listeners at the World Puja Network, is this understanding that everybody has within them the entirety of the universe folded. I'm reminded by a Persian mystic that said, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded. And that's a literal statement that because of the nature of the conscious mind within you, everyone has the entire cosmos folded within them and accessible to them through the nature of this non-local, unbounded component of mind. And no one is without that. If you're a human being, you have it within you. It's a matter of awakening to it and beginning to know how to utilize it, and then specifically how to utilize it for interstellar civilization communication, which is really very important because we're at a time now where, since we know we're being visited by various extraterrestrial civilizations and that they are wanting to reach out to humanity, but the only answer they've gotten back from our governments have been to be shot at, shot down, and also lied to the public about. So what we're trying to do at CSETI.org is to say, look, let's have a citizens diplomacy effort. But the foundation for that is the understanding and experience of this higher state of conscious mind that's within all of us.
Another thing that about the ETs, and you talk about just awakening to our own innate capabilities that we don't even know we've had, and one of them is being able to see the ETs and their craft in their astral form. And these are things that are there, and anyone could see them, but most people don't use their inner vision well enough, and we've developed that skill, and you just people would be amazed at the things that we see in the astral form, which is how the ETs and their craft often have to appear these days because our weapons technologies now are so sophisticated that it's dangerous for them to come in materialized form.
Yeah, we often will see these phases between being completely materialized and solid and then dematerializing. Well, one example I'd like to share is a couple of years ago we were at this contact site we have in Joshua Tree National Park, and where we'll be going again in November. And what's interesting is that we had been in this circle in our meditation, and I was doing a guided meditation. And we were at this point where we're doing sort of a healing meditation and prayer for the earth and for universal peace. At that moment, a craft emerged from the area where we had seen this one land in '96 into the desert. And in fact, it was so bright it lit up the whole desert then. But it was in the air about 15 to 20 feet above us. And it appeared and was completely materialized. It came over the west side of the group, just above one of the Joshua trees at that side of the circle. And it had the strangest sound to it. It was like wow, 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 like that. And it was so close that if I'd stood on my chair and jumped up, I probably could have touched the underside of it. And then it got to the other side of our circle, so we're talking 30, 40, 50 feet, and dematerialized, literally vanished in thin air. Well, it didn't vanish. It was still there. What it did is that its resonance frequency shifted back across the crossing point of light, beyond the speed of light. And so they can phase in and out. It's sort of like, I tell people, like those old radios, like you can dial the station, and you can sometimes hear one station and then another, and you can get between them, and there can be both. Well, often we will see that they will be kind of between the two, where they'll not be solid materialized, but they won't be completely invisible. There'll be this sort of scintillating, almost astral energy field that you'll see that's in the shape of a craft or a being that'll be literally in the field with us. And people, have to blink and say, what am I seeing here? It's really quite astonishing. And that happens, frankly, quite routinely on these expeditions now, and it kind of astonishes people that it would. But to me, it's like normal. I mean, it's interesting how a lot of these reports get sanitized out of the public. I remember being at Colonel Corso, the man who wrote The Day After Roswell, and at his home back some years ago, and there was a whole lot of materials that he had there that had not been published and never, I suspect at this point, never will be. He's passed away now. But one of the things that I learned was that back in 1956, he was at White Sands in that area at where we set off the first nuclear bomb at Trinity site, and Holloman Air Force Base. And there were a lot of ET craft that were coming in because they were very concerned about us developing atomic weapons and the potential to destroy the Earth, but perhaps also us being a threat down the road to other civilizations. And we were using high-powered radar systems to attack and scramble the electronics on these ET craft once they became materialized. And that's why the one in Roswell crashed. I mean, the one in Roswell didn't just crash. It was actually targeted with these electromagnetic type of weapon systems that have been developed and have been known in classified programs since at least the 20s and 30s. Well, Corso saw one of these come in on radar and then saw it come down out in the white sands out on the range far away. So he hopped in his Jeep, went out there, and he saw this craft that was disc-shaped, and it was completely shining, metallic, present. And then it would suddenly vanish, and all he would see would look like a heat wave, a sort of a swirling like you see a mirage when it's really hot on a road, but you could see straight through it. And then it would totally rematerialize and then do that, and did it back and forth, as if it was teaching him about the nature of their technologies. Finally, it stayed materialized, and an ET being appeared outside of it with one of these little communication devices, and that communicated directly through thought to Colonel Corso, and basically asked the colonel to switch off these high-powered radar systems that had been designed to interfere with the electronics of these ET craft. And Colonel Corso, being a brash young military guy, said, "Well, what's in it for me?" And the ET said, "A new world, if you can take it." Very poignant story, happened 52 years ago this summer. And you think about that, and I tell people, well, it's time that we take it now. It's time that we accept this entirely new paradigm and understanding, not only that we're not alone in the universe, but what we have to do in terms of conscious evolution to become part of this interstellar family that's, I think, ready to welcome us with open arms as soon as we quit acting like crazy people shooting at them.
Well, and you know, I love that story too because it is so profound. And unfortunately, the young Colonel Corso wasn't up to taking the new world, but those of us who've done the CSETI Ambassador to the Universe trainings would answer that in a different way, and you know, and hopefully now more and more people, you know, would have that change of heart. But you know, another thing that brought to mind was how the ETs use like positive reinforcement in the things that we do to encourage us to go in different directions. Like, remember the first time that you ever, during a meditation and prayer for the healing of Earth, which you do quite often, invited the ETs to join us in that, and that was in Mount Shasta in 1999. And as soon as you got to that part of the meditation, one of the members of our group heard the words in his head, "Look up," and there was this enormous ET craft moving over us.
Yes, and in fact, that event, which we filmed, I didn't, but this gentleman did, is such an astonishing event because it was precisely at the point where we joined in with this whole interstellar community to put energy on the Earth for its healing and for its evolution to this time of universal peace and these new energy technologies coming out and the whole transformation of world civilization and this beautiful 500,000-year cycle of universal peace that we're about to enter. And at that instant, literally, there was this massive, and it looked like a triangle with 2 points of light. It was like three stars making a perfect equilateral triangle. And it moved in. It was so huge, some people couldn't see it because it was so big. And in between those 3 points of light, it wasn't solid. It was kind of opaque, so it distorted the stars through it. And this object was so large and so far out in space that it was seen from Vancouver all the way down to L.A. and was reported, actually, as such. It came 3 times out of the 5 nights we were there that week.
And every time it came at that same point in your meditation.
It came at the same point. We've since learned that this was an enormous craft that was on the order of hundreds to thousands of miles across. And it was very deep space, and it lit itself up in that configuration as a confirmation of what we were doing. But at the same time, we have seen it at other times. 6 months later, we were up in upstate New York, and had the exact same craft come twice on the same night, and so it was sort of their way of saying, yes, this is exactly the kind of energy and philosophy and concepts that we want to interact with. And so the sort of state of mind of the person wanting to make contact is deterministic. It really determines the outcome of the contact, and which is what we're now sharing with people. I want to mention that we actually have a meditation CD with that meditation that resulted both in the contact, but also how to do the protocols at disclosureproject.org. And there's a new meditation CD in addition to that one that we'll talk about in a moment. That's a specific type of mantra meditation that developed over the last 10 months or so, and that I think is really a breakthrough event.
That was absolutely incredible. And right before we get to that, I also wanted to mention that not only are we meditating and going into deep consciousness to communicate with the ETs, but this consciousness work that we're doing also potentiates others in the world to create change. So we're working on the earth and the universe as well as just communicating with ETs.
Right, and we also do a lot of prayer and meditation for our leaders and for the people on the planet right now to be guided. And it has this really profound effect. It's when you have 30, 40, 50 people in that state of consciousness doing this all together, it's not just additive. It's not, like 1 and 1 is 2. It's an exponential power. And that's why I tell people when we do these expeditions and do this together for an entire week out under the stars in these beautiful places, it results, I think, in a potentiation for the good future that is clearly the destiny of humanity and of Earth.
So back to what you had alluded to about the breakthrough in the use of the mantra that was revealed to you back in June of 2007. And this is just incredible. It's something that had been lost for thousands of years, and it was revealed to you, and you have brought it to us. And like you mentioned, we do have a double CD on that topic. And why don't you tell that story?
Well, this happened very spontaneously. I mean, many people, I have to say, before I was an emergency doctor, I was a meditation teacher and had become quite a student of the Vedas and also Sanskrit. Actually used to tutor people in Sanskrit. And we were doing a type of a mantra meditation, and a mantra is just a thought sound. It's a thought that has a certain resonant quality that allows the mind to relax and stay lightly focused on it, so that you go into deeper and deeper and deeper levels of consciousness until you find yourself in just pure consciousness, and that's the state of transcendent consciousness, or samadhi. And I've been doing this since I was a teenager, actually, and have had extraordinary experiences in this that I talk about in my last book called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which is at disclosureproject.org. But this particular day, we were in Colorado in this community called Crestone near the Great Sand Dunes, and it was last year in late June, early July, and we had gone into this beautiful dome that's there, that's a Zen meditation center, and I was leading a meditation for everyone, and if people had really extraordinary experiences, and that meditation is actually on this new CD that's at disclosureproject.org. But then I went back to our townhouses and meditated, and I went into a state of consciousness that was, I just have to say it was samadhi, very deep, very pure, very quiet, and suddenly I heard these 3 pure tones, and they're a perfect fit. Da, 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 da. And they were emerging from this unbounded being, this unbounded mind, as these 3 pure tones. And I'm not musical at all, so you'll forgive me. But it was so profound. And then it became this mantra, this 3-syllable mantra. And it then became multidimensional. And it was like this amazing and by the way, this is an ancient mantra that's been used in the Himalayas and in India and in the Sanskrit tradition for thousands of years or longer. But I found that the tonality of it, the musical tonality of it, had been lost. Well, this is what was sort of just came forth out of this state of mind, and that's what's now on this meditation CD, which anyone who wants it can get it. So it's very effective and it's incredibly powerful. And what it does is that it enables the mind to have this mantra running almost automatically. It's almost like a tone, a musical tone. And the mind can have it just going. And if the mind is not focused too hard on it, but just lightly and relaxed, you'll find yourself in deeper and deeper states till you arrive in this universal state of consciousness. From there, you can then learn, and this is on another CD, that's the one I mentioned before, how to remote view space and how to contact these ETs, and then how to invite them into your area so that if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people that you're simpatico with and very united with, that you can practice this and you will have some amazing contact experiences with these people, visitors from other star systems. And the reason I think this is so important is that, again, talking about Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic fields, is the concept that if more and more people do this, it not only lets these visitors know that there are enlightened people on Earth wanting to make peaceful contact, that not everyone wants to shoot them down with Star Wars weapon systems, but that there are people, by doing this, it begins to move our entire culture and our entire civilization non-locally in that direction because of the power of the conscious mind at a deep level of meditation. And it's a little bit like the 100th monkey effect, where it just begins to affect the Earth, its future, and everyone on it. It's a very powerful technology and very effective. And that is the power of the mind, particularly when you understand that the individual, us as individuals, are all sort of fountains or focal points or entry points for this unbounded being, the great being, the unbounded mind that's within us. And by using this mantra meditation, which is something we now have put onto this 2-set CD that people can get at disclosureproject.org, you can learn to do this. And what happens is that you will find that then you're ready to go to the next step, and that is to go into the remote viewing mode and to be able to see remote planets or starships or ET vehicles that might even be around Earth, and invite them in a spirit of peace to wherever you are, assuming you're out someplace that's private and you're not going to pull them into your, right in the middle of the city. But although that's happened as well, I might add. We've had people experiment with this, and they've had these amazing sightings right in their backyard. But I think that the reason this is so powerful is not so much so that people can see an ET craft. It's because by doing this, it creates this resonant field, this morphogenic resonant field that begins to affect everyone on the Earth and the future of the Earth and manifest this time of universal peace, which is the only possible future. Everyone gets all wrapped up in the current with the state of the world. And what I point out is that a lot of that noise is just the death throes of an old yuga, an old era that's passing away in front of our eyes. But what we are having to do is create the foundation for a new civilization, one that is universally at peace, going into space peacefully, that lets the truth be known about all these things, and also allows these wonderful new energy and propulsion technologies to be used for peaceful and not military purposes so that we can have free energy, no pollution, and have abundance for all the world's children so that there's not just a few people, 20% or so of the world doing well, and the other 80% in terrible poverty with, barely knowing, where the next meal's coming from, if that. So I think that all of this is very connected, and it happens first on the level of thought and consciousness.
What I really love about the mantra having a tone or tune is that it sticks in your head, like usually some really lame radio commercial or something, ditty would stick in your head, and instead you've got a mantra in your head. It's very calming, but I always think, just imagine if people all over the world had that mantra running through their minds, what a nicer world we'd have.
Well, and it's a very powerful technique for transcendence, for going into this unbounded state of awareness. And as a meditation technique, it's very powerful. And what I point out is that what we're doing with CSETI is, where most people think the ending of the process is the beginning for us. In other words, the arrival at the state of pure mind and samadhi, then we go into the remote viewing mode, and then from there, after we see and remote view these ET civilizations or spacecraft, then we vector them or guide them into our location by a series of imaging, which I call coherent thought sequencing, which is in a meditation set that is at disclosureproject.org. And the purpose of that is so that we can actually make open, peaceful contact. And what's amazing is that if people will do it with a pure heart, with an open mind, without fear, and in a state of really wanting to manifest this state of this universal peace, what's beautiful about it is that we have never been disappointed. I mean, we do this 4 or 5 weeks out of the year where we go, sometimes 6 weeks out of the year where we go all over with groups ranging from 25 to 50 people, and we have never been disappointed. And I'm convinced that these extraterrestrial civilizations are really eagerly awaiting more and more people. Imagine if millions of people started understanding this and doing it. Well, there's no power on Earth, there's no government on Earth who could then stop it, because it's just not able to be stopped when enough people do it with that intent.
And that is just an amazing thing. And after you had that revelation about the mantras in June of 2007, then we went to Joshua Tree National Park again in November of 2007 and had the most amazing experience. And once again, it happened at the end of our field work when we were leaving the field.
Right.
And you've called it now the Orion transmissions.
Yes, so this is really interesting. At CSETI.org, we actually have these up. But it was a very, very unusual thing that happened towards the end of that meeting. This was just 6 months ago or so at Joshua Tree National Park, and we had a rose quartz sphere, which is very powerful sort of connection electromagnetically. And we always have a set of electromagnetic devices. We have, as Linda mentioned, a portable laser radar detector that we keep out in the field. Sometimes we'll have magnetometers and other electronic sensing devices, because often these craft, when they're about to approach, they will send out bursts of energy that will set those detectors off. Even though they're not particularly high-tech, they're very effective. And, of course, we're always out in areas way far away from any man-made sources for that. And this particular night, we were breaking just at the very end, and I was doing a specific technique in consciousness, connecting to the ETs, and holding this, it's about a 2 or 3 inch diameter rose quartz sphere up with one hand. And my other hand, I was doing sort of energy work pointing towards the Earth. And all of a sudden, the detector started going off. And it started going off in a very anomalous set of tones and rhythms. And this went on for 20-some minutes. I don't know exactly how many minutes.
Yeah, amazing.
I mean, this was not just a short thing. And I then realized that I could tune it. And as I turned around, I realized that the tones that were coming through this whole bioelectromagnetic field from space to us, into the Earth, into everyone on the Earth, was coming out of Orion. Now, I'm not saying, but it was in that sector of space where Orion is. If you look at the night sky, it's setting now around sunset, Orion. But it was out of that sector of space. And it's an amazing thing that happened. And that it was very clearly an energy shift. It wasn't just tones. It was like it affected everyone there. And
even the coyotes.
The detector, I think, was just sort of a confirmation of the fact that energy was coming through us. Later, we actually took one of these high-powered lasers, and we signaled up in the direction of Orion, and these white lights started signaling back. And this went on for several minutes between our team and these ETs that were out in that area of the sky where Orion. And sort of between Orion's belt and Orion's sword, but right in that area. And so we call these the Orion transmissions, and they're at CSETI.org also. But a very fascinating a contact event, and it wasn't just that there were these tones that went through this man-made machine that made these beeping tones that went on for 20-some minutes. It was the energy that was coming through us and from us then to the ground of the earth and through the earth into all of humanity. It was a clear sort of resonant frequency transmission that went on for, like I said, 22, 23 minutes and had an enormous effect on everyone who was there. And
yeah,
this was, I don't know how many people, maybe 30 or 40 people watching this.
Yeah, over 30 people, and it wasn't just sounds we were listening to. I mean, you could feel emotion and an urgency in certain parts of the transmissions, and it was really a communication that profoundly went into all of us. And I remember you said at the time, the first real message that you could put into words that you received from it was, "Oh God, let us be of service to you."
That's right. Yeah. No, it was very beautiful.
Yeah, it was incredible.
And that's how we ended that particular night.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, people are welcome to come on these expeditions if they have the time and inclination to do it. I think that everyone should begin to, who are enlightened and understand the principles of consciousness, they should begin to view themselves as ambassadors from humanity to these visitors. I think it's a very big mistake to wait for the U.S. State Department or the White House or Congress or the United Nations to do this. These visitors have been waiting for 60 years for that, and all they've gotten is denial or ridicule or being fired at. And so here's an opportunity. What we've tried to do is put together all the tools that people need, both in terms of understanding specific meditation techniques, in particular our contact protocols, as sort of a series of CDs that are in this training kit that are at disclosureproject.org, and people can then just do it. I mean, there's no kind of formal process here if you don't want to go through it, but if you want to, you can come on one of these expeditions, and you can find out the dates of these at CSETI.org. I think that the key thing is to understand that everyone has this as sort of a sacred responsibility who's aware that we're not alone, because we can't abdicate this task any further to governments around the world that are twiddling their thumbs. I think that if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. And we're seeing this already. We're seeing that there was recently, for example, a meeting at the United Nations where 2 or 3 dozen countries were present, and it was a secret meeting, but I have people who I know who were there, where this whole issue is being discussed, and where there's this big debate going on in the international community about whether all this information should be disclosed and how it should be handled. Now, there were U.S. military people at this meeting trying to scare the hell out of everyone, saying, "Oh, well, we can't do this. It'll make the economy more unstable, and it'll do this." That's just typical fear-mongering nonsense. The truth of the matter is that if the people begin to do this, and there begin to be more and more of these events, everyone's heard of the Phoenix Lights, the big events that happened on March 13th, 1997 in Phoenix, Arizona. What they don't know is that that was a close encounter of the fifth kind, which is what we call these contacts, where we set up the protocols in consciousness and invite these craft in. We were there in Phoenix doing that the night that happened. And, in fact, the center of the sightings was right over a facility where we were putting together all the digital images to give to Congress for the briefings in April of 1997. And I had asked the ETs to show up and do something unmistakable and that there'd be good film footage, and it turned out that's exactly what happened. And so what you find is that what would happen if thousands and even millions of people began to do this? I think you would find that the truth would have to come out, the technologies would have to come out after the truth that we're not alone. And when these technologies come out that deal with new energy, free energy, anti-gravity, then we're not going to have oil. We're not going to use oil. We're not going to use coal. We're not going to have 80% of the world in poverty. This will be the tide that will lift all ships. And this is what has been suppressed and kept secret now for decades, at least 60 years, and maybe 100 years. And I think that what has to happen is that people have to learn about this, but not just stop with the passive learning. They need to go into action. And this is a way that everyone can learn to be an ambassador, a citizen ambassador to these visitors, and be an ambassador to the universe. And I invite everyone listening to look seriously into that and take that on as a really a sacred responsibility of this generation that's being ignored right now. And this is something we can all do.
Well, I can only say that you actually and CSETI have been the source of some of the most profound and delightful learning experiences of my life.
Yeah, it's been wonderful having you with us, Linda. I have to tell everyone listening, Linda has been such a great help overall. She's really been key to us doing this work and helping with all these efforts, not only for disclosureproject.org, but also CSETI for the last 11 years or so. And I think that without Linda, we wouldn't have been able to do a lot of this. So I want to thank Linda Willitts for all of that help.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure for me.
Well, I think that one of the things I would like to say sort of in conclusion is that if people will begin to study this whole area of how consciousness and how we have within us this universal field of consciousness, and we can develop it, and how that it can then be an applied consciousness science where we can use it for the good. We can use it for the transformation of the earth. We can use it for making peaceful contact with these visitors, and we can create this wonderful time of universal peace for this planet. This is something that is not a question of if it's going to happen. The only question is when and how and who. And I always say people have misinterpreted this thing where, they say, well, many are called but few are chosen. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's many are called but few choose to answer the call. That's the correct translation. And so people have to realize this is a planet of free will. We have to choose to be at service for something this important and this far-reaching. But if we do, we'll just be delighted with the kind of wonderful and amazing things that will happen not only in our lives but in the world. And we're seeing this now. As I mentioned, we've been modeling this open contact with visitors for 18 years, and now we have a major G7 country that has, in the last year and a half, been communicating with us through their Ministry of Defense to set up these contacts with these visitors so that can then be all filmed and then it can be disclosed to the world. The fact that there's a major industrialized country even entertaining doing that shows that it's shifting. All this is shifting in the direction of disclosing all these truths coming out, the technology's coming out, but we need more people doing this because it enlivens the potential for change. And that's everyone's responsibility, and I invite people to join us.
Amen. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Linda, for being with us today and sharing your experiences with this. And I'd like to thank again all of you for listening with Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and it's brought to you again by the World Puja Network. And I would like to thank the World Puja Network for allowing us to speak about this today with everyone. And thanks to all of you, and thank you, Linda, for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.